Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. Well, Michael, it is August 29th, 2025.
Good morning.
And yes, good morning to you. And we're going to be talking about cultures, both in terms of the world, different cultures in the world, but I also want to spend some time talking about culture in the United States, the American culture, whether or not it still exists in the form that it historically has. But the first thing I think we need to do is we need to define what the word culture means.
Yes.
And so I'll take a shot at it.
Okay.
And so I believe that the word culture, what is included in culture are the customs and values that a society holds in common, with the greater emphasis in terms of togetherness on values. Customs, for example, are foods, clothing, just customary type of things.
Yeah.
And you can have within a society, you can have multi-customism, and that's perfectly fine.
That's a new word for me.
Well, it's a new word for me. I just made it up.
Very good.
But you've heard the term multicultural.
Yes.
And many people said that was a good thing.
Right.
And for years I've wondered how could people of different values, how could they live together successfully and peacefully?
That's well said in a few words.
And so let's talk a little bit about has the American culture ever, like for example, if I say the Chinese culture, a lot of people could say, well, the Chinese culture probably has to do with Buddhism, Confucianism, has to do with the fact that they, for thousands of years, were ruled by emperors, but it's a monolith. It is more or less a monolithic culture. There's not a bunch of different cultures. There are a bunch of different languages in China. And
it's ethnically homogeneous.
It is ethnically homogeneous, and it is culturally
uniform.
Culturally uniform. But the United States was there ever a time when the United States had a set of values that were more or less
uniform,
or at least everybody agreed. Or the very large majority of the people agreed that these were the values that we hold dear.
Yes.
And so was there a time?
Let's step back a second and say, why are we talking about this topic at this point?
Yeah, good.
So after prior episodes, we started talking about the clash of civilizations. We've mentioned that before, Samuel Huntington's great work that said on a global scale, the conflicts that we see are not so much between states as they are between civilizations.
Mm-hmm. And I think, cultures.
Yes, and he calls them clash of civilizations. We're making a little transition to cultures,
exactly,
and discussing whether that means, because within the United States, presumably we're kind of one civilization. But what is a civilization? What is a culture? I think his point was you have, the whole legacy of China, of Japan, of India, of Islamic culture, of African cultures, of
Russian Orthodox.
I think those were 5 or 6 of the ones that he Western altogether he took, what would be Europe and North America since 17 or 1600, something like that.
Yeah.
So we're applying that idea to what's going on internally in the United States.
Yes.
Because I think you and I agree that we see a lot of our problems as clashes of cultures.
Yes.
Because we are a multicultural society. I remember back in the 80s and 90s, we had arguments over, are we a quilt or are we a salad, or all these metaphors for how we can be thought to hang together. Mm-hmm. What's our relationship to one another? Because it emphasized difference. Mm-hmm. People no longer wanted to change their name to be an anglicized name and fit into American culture, which was at Ellis Island, in the late 1800s and 1900s, people were ready to change their name and become part of something new.
Yeah, and at that time, if people were changing their names to become part of the what I will call the American culture, what was the American culture at that time, and where was it articulated? Was it articulated anywhere?
Yeah. Well, so you asked the question, what is culture? And, we talked about it being customs and values. I think there's other things we could include in that, like laws, how we're governed. Those are expressions of values.
Yep.
In particular, how much is a culture individualistic and encourage autonomy, and how much is it collectivist and encourage conformity? Japan, for instance, is a very conformist society. Individualism is kind of an awkward graft onto historical Japanese behavior.
Correct. And that goes back to Taoism.
Yes, very communal.
Yes.
And even Chinese is based on Confucianism, which is very family-oriented, and it's a collective.
Confucianism/Buddhism.
Yes.
Would be China and actually Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, all of those countries.
And when we were doing knowledge products, I remember the author of our edition on China said they don't have a concept of individual liberty.
Right.
For them, liberty is freedom from a foreign oppressor.
Right.
So they have their whole concept of identity is collective.
Right. Exactly. And so the American culture, was there ever a time where Americans shared many, where most Americans shared many of the same values? So I'm not going to make it absolutes where all Americans shared all the same values. I'm not going to say that because you can't. That makes no sense. But was there a time when most Americans shared many of the same values?
I've seen some historians really talk about how much of a checkerboard early United States was, how many different kinds of points of view there were. There were people that were loyal to England. There were people that wanted to secede from England. And that the American Revolution was first a civil war between different factions within the United States, and the separationists ends up winning, and then we had a revolutionary war to become
and the way when you say a civil war, it wasn't a civil war in the sense it was violence. It was a difference in points of view.
Well, there were some riots and some things like that.
Compared to our civil, but there's a real civil war.
It was not a military confrontation between two sides with standing armies.
Right.
This was a civil disturbance, and I think there was some violence where people were tarred and feathered and thrown out of homes and things like that. There were some angry people.
Right.
But this is what historians excel at, by going back and looking at things and maybe overturning what prior historians said was the case. You'd presume that people came here for a common cause, to get away from the repression. Sometimes it was religious suppression. When you hear the Puritan story, that was supposedly about their inability to express their religious conscience. And other people came for other reasons, and particularly over time, as people started coming from places other than England, they had different histories that and still to this day, you have people fleeing Venezuela, some for good reasons and some not. One of my daughter's best friends in business school was Venezuelan, very wealthy family, but they were highly oppressed in Venezuela.
Yeah, they fled.
Yeah.
So I get back to the question, was there ever a time where the American culture was defined in a way so that you could make the claim that at that point in time, most Americans agreed with many of the same values? And my answer to that is yes.
Okay.
So just so that
well, I'll take the no side just to make this interesting, but I would be interested to know what you mean by how it was defined. Was it in the law that says this is our culture?
Yes.
Okay.
The Bill of Rights.
Okay.
The Bill of Rights and the Constitution, because that was at a time, and you and I have talked about this on previous podcasts, is, as you point out, the United States, George Washington said, he was asked about why he led the American Revolution. He said, I led the American Revolution to be free of England. I didn't lead the American Revolution because I believed in the Constitution, because I hadn't thought of it at that point. At the time that I led the American Revolution, it was to be free of England, and that was articulated in the Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
And I really encourage all of our listeners to pull out the Declaration of Independence. In fact, it'd be good to pull it out with two or three people and read it very, very slowly. It's the finest. It's the finest political document I believe ever written, because it's extremely tight. Now, Thomas Jefferson would also be interesting in reading what we think of as the Declaration of Independence, is to go back and also read, and you can find it by searching for it, Thomas Jefferson's first draft, because it's not the same as what was the final draft, because it got amended in Congress many times. I think over 30 times. There were 30 amendments. But the Declaration of Independence is a wonderful document to read as a political document. But then our Constitution was drafted where the people who drafted the Constitution recognized that there were many differences. And so I said, well, how are we going
in the country
within the country?
Okay, yeah.
Just as you said earlier, that we weren't. And so what they did was they said, well, how are we going to account for the fact that we have differences now, but that we also will have more geography and perhaps even more differences going forward? How do we do that? And so that was why the Constitution was drafted the way that it was to account for those things.
Before we get too far away from the Declaration of Independence, there's two things I want to say. One is we've mentioned several times that we have done the Giants of Political Thought. It was a publishing business you and I started long ago. We've reissued the Giants of Political Thought in a streaming platform. One of those is on the Declaration of Independence.
Yes, and Common Sense, which is paired with that.
Yes.
And that also articulates values.
The culture of the time.
Yes.
Common Sense was a pamphlet written by Thomas Paine to really rally allegiance to the revolutionary cause.
Yes.
So the point I wanted to make about the Declaration of Independence that our author really powerfully makes, I had never thought of this, but he said, we look at the philosophy at the beginning, that says who we are and we claim our independence, et cetera, the first few paragraph, I think it is. But he said what was important to the people of the time was the list of grievances that justified why it's bad enough to leave. That people had the philosophy already in mind. They knew it, according to him. This was not news to them. It was reciting something that everybody already accepted, which is evidence of a pretty unified culture of what people believed in common.
Yes.
And what they needed was the legal argument that said, George did this, he did this, he did that. He's not got our interests in mind. Right. He's abusing us, not governing us.
He's not keeping his end of the bargain.
Yes.
There was a bargain.
Right.
And so just to make a point on the Declaration of Independence, what it says at that one spot that lays out the foundation for it is we hold these truths to be self-evident. Yeah. That we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then it goes on to say, and when those rights are abused, then we have a people has a right to throw off the government that's abusing those rights.
Yeah, just to hear you say those words from memory, I'll say we don't have it written down here, but you remember it. They have almost a sacred quality to them. Yeah, and I think it makes my skin crawl a little bit because we believe these things intensely. And I think part of our controversy now is some people want to return to this kind of sacred belief that there's something special about the United States. There's other people who want to relegate that to a secondary kind of consideration and look at the things that have been bad in our history.
What's the most important part of that phrase? What do you find the most interesting?
The phrase endowed by our Creator.
Okay.
Because that overturned a universal history in the world, which is that governments get their authority from God and then they are sovereign over their subjects.
Right. Yeah.
And this overturned that order.
Yes. And there's another part of that, and it's the part right before it. We hold these truths to be self-evident.
Right.
So, and that is so important because it is there for anyone to see, which is that governments that abuse their rights are self-evidently tyrannical
and subject to overthrow.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying, that reading the Declaration of Independence carefully and understanding it in the context of the time, but then also asking yourself, do those ideas and values, do they still matter? I think they do.
Well, one of the embedded values that I hear in that is self-government. We're expected to govern ourselves first.
Yes.
Govern our families next.
Yes.
Govern our communities next. And what's left needs to be taken care of collectively, but at that time, it was not a lot.
So now, are those cultural values, what you just said, are those cultural values?
Yes.
Yes, they absolutely are. And so the question is, do most of the members of our society today share those same values? And I would argue that that's where the polarization is coming, is that they don't.
There are many people who don't, yeah. I don't know how to measure it.
Yeah.
Some pollsters probably may try. But I think it's pretty evident to you and me that there's a lot of people that do not buy that formula.
And you see, and we don't guess that by talking to people. We guess it by watching events.
Yeah.
And watching then watching what people say in response to certain events.
Right.
Now, but the other place, Michael, that I think that our values, our cultural values, are articulated, is in the Bill of Rights. In fact, they're laid out there very specifically, and the general idea of the Bill of Rights, especially the First Amendment, is that we have to tolerate each other. We have to, as a value, we have to tolerate our differences, but we have to tolerate them. We don't have to accept them. We have to tolerate them. We don't have to agree with them.
Don't have to like it.
Don't have to like them.
Yeah.
And so when somebody says, well, if you don't like my values, you're a bad person.
Right.
I reject that entirely. Somebody can have opinions that are different than mine, and I'm okay with that.
Right.
I think, as you know, Michael, I think they're wrong, but they can still be wrong. They have a right. They have a right to be wrong.
And I happen to think it's pretty boring to live around people that agree with you on everything.
When I did talk radio, I loved it when the guest that Teddy had on the show was somebody who had different opinions. It made the show go by very quickly, and it was very interesting. And the discussions were always, they were pointed, but they were civil.
Yeah, and if they're respectful, if I want to do life my way, it seems incumbent on me to respect someone else's ability to do the same.
But that's a cultural value. Yeah. I'm saying that's what but that's part of the question is that's part of our culture.
Yeah.
And so,
so let's contrast that.
At least it was at one point. Yeah. So continuing on, all of the items that are articulated in the Bill of Rights, as well as the Constitution itself. The Constitution is a more complicated document to read and understand how it relates to values at that time and whether or not we still share those values. It is more difficult because it's how the government is going to be formed. And you have to understand checks and balances and what people were thinking about how if too much power is allowed to be concentrated in one place, that bad things will ultimately happen. And so we need to have a constitution that divides those powers, separation of powers, co-equal branches of government, and all those things. That's a more complex discussion. But the Bill of Rights are specific rights, and those Bill of Rights, they articulate what we believed to be are the values that most of us believed were correct, and they passed overwhelmingly. The Bill of Rights passed overwhelmingly. So we know that at that particular point in time, that the values articulated in the Bill of Rights were almost universally shared.
And so, most of the Bill of Rights were provisions that further limited the government and made it clear what the government was not empowered to do.
Right, and what the individual and what individual rights
were left to people that the government couldn't interfere with.
Yes.
The right to assemble, the right to they call it to religion, but I think of that as having a conscience.
Right.
To have your conscience respected, right to speak, the right not to have your house used for military purposes. There's a bunch of them in there that are all limitations on government.
Yes, and by the way, and there's a significant distinction of the limitations on the Congress as opposed to the states, because the last two 9 and 10 amendments 9 and 10, they're the ones that articulate that if a power is not delegated to the federal government by the Constitution, that power is left to the states.
Yeah, that's called enumeration.
Yes.
Meaning if we don't enumerate it and give the power to the government, they don't have it.
Yeah.
And so the benefit of the doubt goes the other way.
Right. And what we're really talking about here now is it's not only what it says, but did people at that time agree with that? And what I'm saying is that we know for a fact that they did, because the Bill of Rights was universally ratified by all the states. And so that meant that all of the states agreed with that, and they did it pretty quickly. So the Constitution took more time. You had the Federalist Papers, you had the ratification debate, you had all these different things. But the Bill of Rights, once they were agreed to, they passed quickly and universally.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I didn't know that. I knew there was a ratification process for the entire Constitution, and they had there was a ratio, like 2/3 or something of the states had to approve it. Yeah. Then they stopped because it was approved.
Well, they got to 9, and then the 10 through 13 eventually approved. But that was the Federalist Papers and the great debate over whether or not the Constitution was worth ratifying. Yeah. And obviously, the people who thought it should be ratified won, but there was a contest there.
Right. But there were a few people who thought it shouldn't be ratified.
Right. There were some. Yeah. And that's articulated, and it's in the historical record. But during the ratification debates, there were a whole bunch of people who said, well, I'd be for the Constitution as long as there were limits on government and as long as there was a greater expression of individual rights. And so as that process went on, the need for the Bill of Rights became clearer.
Yes.
And so the Bill of Rights was not adopted at the same time as the Constitution, but it was right after.
Yeah.
And then once they were agreed to, and by the way, there were over 20 amendments that were offered, and 10 became the Bill of Rights.
Okay.
And so it's also worth going back and looking at, just for people who are interested in the subject, they ought to go back and look at the amendments that were offered that were rejected.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting because so not all of the amendments that were offered were accepted, and there wasn't anything that said there will only be 10. So there were 10 of the group of all of them that were accepted because it was believed that these represent what the people want. And then the evidence that the people did want that was how quickly the Bill of Rights was then ratified.
So the Declaration was in 1776, and the Constitution was 1787.
Correct.
We're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration next year, and then in another 10 years, the anniversary of the Constitution. So one of the interesting things to do is to consider what has changed in 250 years.
Yes, and that's the point that I wanted to get to is culturally, are we, because I don't believe societies that have, I don't believe multicultural societies by definition are societies where the people in the society do not share the same values.
Yes.
And to me, that's a recipe for conflict.
Yes.
If I believe that you have the right to say whatever you want to, and you don't believe that, okay, then I'm at a significant disadvantage.
If I don't believe you have a right to say what you have to say.
Yes. What I want, if we're
I
not,
can shut you up if I don't like what you got to say.
If you get the right to shut me up or to imprison me,
cancel
me, however you want to do it, but I can't do it to you, and because I don't want to,
right?
Then I'm at a significant disadvantage,
yes, right?
And society will not. You can't survive as a society because ultimately the ones who have the power to put people in jail are the ones who would win, and then that would then become the value of that society.
Right.
That would become that value. And so today, where do you think we are in the spectrum? And then we'll get over to the world, but maybe we don't get there. But the reason that I think this is so interesting is the reaction to this recent shooting and the murder in Minnesota of the 2 children in the church, and it turns out that the person who committed the murder and then turned around and killed himself was a person who was named Robert and then transitioned and about a year or so ago became Robin, and so that person is a transgender person,
right?
And we don't know. We do know this. We know that because we live here in Nashville. We know that a similar thing happened in Nashville, where you had a trans person, except it was the opposite. It was a woman who was transitioning to a man who claimed that she was a man, who then killed students and staff at Covenant Presbyterian Church. But what we learned after that was that person had been under psychiatric care for like close to 20 years and was on 4 psychotropic drugs.
Yes.
And so the question for me is when people and this is if they're suffering from any kind of mental illness or depression, and the only reason that psychotropic drugs are used, I'm not talking about puberty blockers and hormone therapy; those are different. But if you are being prescribed a psychotropic drug, you are by definition mentally ill. They say that there's a mental illness that drug is trying to address.
Right.
But on the warning label of psychotropic drugs, it says right there that these drugs may cause ideations of suicide or ideations of homicide.
Right.
And what we have found is that there's 3 or 4 instances now where, there are many of the mass murders. And by the way, a mass murder and we're going to get into what the definitions are. When they talk about these mass killings or mass murders, it's not like 2 gangs who there's 15 members of each gang and 5 of them are killed in a gang shootout. I don't think they call that a mass murder, even though there's 3 or more people who are killed. They define a mass murder because the victims are innocents. In other words, they didn't choose to participate in a fight that may lead to their death, and so they're innocent. They're innocent
it's a subtle
people.
twist in the definition to exclude gang warfare.
Right. And so
let's step back and talk about. We moved very quickly from a discussion of culture now to mass murder and
it's the reaction that I'm trying to get to.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
And so the culture has changed so that a lot of people believe autonomy means things it didn't used to mean. For instance, you can reconceive your biology. And that your identity, your sexual identity or gender identity can be changed at your whim.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would say your gender identity is very fluid. That's psychological. Your biological identity cannot be changed. You're born with certain chromosomes.
Well, that's what you and I
That's
believe
what we
to be
think.
true.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I think. But there's a lot of people that don't accept that. So the concept of autonomy that we have, of individualism, has gone way beyond some limits that would not have been conceivable to people 200 years ago. The technology didn't exist for these. I'm sure they had cross-dressing people and gay people and things like that, and would have been aware of them, although repressed, I'm guessing.
Here in Nashville, there was one particular person, a very, very successful businessman, and he would show up. He was a cross-dresser, and he would show up at parties, like Halloween parties. He had a beautiful $5,000 Halston dress and a wonderful witch's hat. And he would show up at every year. He would show up at the Halloween party, and he'd walk in. People would say, "Hello, Neil. How are you?"
It was great fun. Yeah,
But he was a serious cross-dresser.
Let's talk about these melting pots.
Yes.
Where there are so many very different people. There's 3 places in the United States that occur to me where this is particularly characteristic. One is New Orleans, one is New York, and one is San Francisco. Okay, because there's so much, particularly in New York and San Francisco, there's so much immigration. I think there's a few hundred languages spoken in New York now. But you think of New Orleans, they have drag queens, and it's just part of, how they do things down there. And people just move on. They don't get offended by it, and you might go, say, somewhere in the rural South or the upper Midwest where that's just not going to fly.
Right.
They're not going to tolerate drag queen shows in front of their children and things like that.
Well, the drag queen shows in front of children, even in New Orleans, is a relatively new phenomenon.
Okay, I don't know that.
It's a relative. This is what part of the issue is, and then the books in children's libraries and things like this. That gets into this cultural question. That's what I was trying to. What's interesting to me is culturally you have a group of people that believe that 2- and 3-year-olds ought to be taught sex education while they're 2 or 3, and not taught just sex education between a male and a female, but between a male and a female and transgender.
Right.
And then saying if you're uncomfortable in your body, then maybe you need to transition. I'm a very tolerant person for people who are old enough to make their own decisions, because then I believe that if you make your own decision, then you live with your own decision.
Yes, and you pay for your own decision.
And you pay for your own decision. What I am opposed to, is I don't believe that 10-year-olds should drive a car. I think it's dangerous to other people, but I also think it's dangerous to themselves. I think that
they should be protected by statutory rape provisions. They're not old enough.
They're not old
to
enough
do certain things
because their minds are not developed enough. I don't believe that if a parent says, "Well, it's okay with me if my 10-year-old drinks alcohol in my house," I think because they want to drink alcohol. I think it's okay. I'm not going to let them drive. They'll be protected from. Nobody else can possibly be harmed by my 10-year-old drinking alcohol in my house. I see that as a form of child abuse. And I believe that those parents should be held accountable for allowing a 10-year-old to essentially to become an alcoholic. And so you have different things that we as a society say that you need to be a certain age. That doesn't mean that everybody lives by that law, but they should. We have a law.
Right.
And by the way, if you are, I even got it, and I kind of like this. I got carded the other day. I was buying a drink, and the people in front of me were being carded. Well, I said, this people they card. So I pulled out my driver's license and I ordered a glass of wine. This was at Dolly. By the way, wonderful show.
Oh, the show, yes. I saw it a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. And so
it's a
I
stage play about Dolly Parton.
Yes.
It's being tested now in Nashville.
Yes. So my wife and I were getting a glass of wine to take into and so I pulled out my driver's license and I handed it to him, and he said, "Well, thank you for being prepared," and he smiled.
Yes.
So I was carded, and which is good. But we as a society believe that you need to be a certain age to drive, because we recognize that there's danger in driving. With certain age to vote. So we have certain ages to do a number of things.
Right.
But for the people who believe in allowing anyone of any age to transition, my ask of them is, because we now know that a significant percentage of the people who transition as children wished they hadn't. And later in life. I think in Europe they did a study on it, and it was well over 50% wished that they had not. But the journey back is not possible. You can't transition back and be the same person that you were before you transitioned.
Yes,
it's not possible.
Right.
And so my question is, for those who believe, because I believe that parents who allow a 10-year-old to drink in their own home, I believe that that's against the law and they're held accountable by the law. I think the same thing's true if a parent knowingly allows a 10-year-old to drive a car. That they are held accountable for that. So there are a number of things that parents and adults, other adults, would be held accountable for if they allowed it to happen. So if a rental car company rented a car to a 10-year-old, the rental car company would be held accountable. My question is, how do you hold adults accountable for changing a person's body at age 10? Who then, when they get to be 25, says, "I wasn't old enough to make that decision, and I wish I hadn't made it, and I wish the people who did it to me hadn't done it." How in our society would those people, culturally speaking now, our values, we say that parents should be held accountable, adults should be held accountable in all these other areas. But yet if you mutilate, I call it mutilating, a body at a young age, I call that mutilating their body, and if they turn out 15 years later they wished it hadn't happened, is anybody held accountable?
Obviously, this is very complicated, and there's a bunch of places where they believe that the parents do not need to even be included in that. So if the parents are... That's
even another part of our discussion about our culture, is that...
Yeah. Well, we mentioned earlier, we're responsible for ourselves, we're responsible for our families, then for our community, and so this is a bottom-up kind of governance. That's what our culture used to be. That we started with in the United States.
Right.
And so if you follow that kind of pattern, the parents are the primary ones responsible for their children to make decisions in their interest. And in lots of places, it has been decided that if the parents believe a certain way, they have to be held accountable and eliminated from that influence, superseded by a school teacher or somebody in a public agency that's going to look out for the interests of the child,
or the school psychologist.
Yeah, who think that the parents are not really looking out for that child's interest. Who gets to say what the child's interest is and who's authorized to pursue it?
Right. And so within our culture, if you go back 20 years, there really wasn't much question as to who had the authority to make decisions for a child. It was the parent.
Yes.
That was part of our culture. That was part of a widely held set of beliefs.
And a critic would say there was a lot of abuse that went on. There's a lot of neglect that went on. It wasn't perfect.
No, nothing is perfect.
Sure.
So let's stipulate that nothing. You can always find exceptions to every rule if you're trying to disprove the rule by saying, well, here's an exception, and
Right.
therefore that disproves the rule.
That's
You
right.
can always do that.
That's right.
And so the question now today is, are bureaucrats or people who have authority, some kind of professional authority? So, for example, the school psychologist is a degreed psychologist. If the school psychologist is counseling a 10-year-old who is expressing at some point gender, or I think they call it gender dysphoria,
Yes.
and the psychiatrist says, well, I believe, young man, that you should transition to become a woman, and I will prescribe the hormone treatments and the prescriptions. I will prescribe those, and you'll take them here at school, and your parents will never know.
Yes.
Should that person be held accountable for the future behavior of that 10-year-old?
Well, you'd think that if somebody has authority, that the responsibility goes along with authority.
Yeah. And that is a great cultural point. Is that we have as a culture believed that if you have authority, then you can be held accountable. But these people do not believe that they should be held accountable for decisions that they make on behalf of the child. And by the way, the professional doctors who perform the surgery at an enormous profit, they don't think they should be held accountable either. And so that's the question in our culture. Are we saying that there are certain things where you have the authority to do something, but you have no accountability for the decisions if they go wrong?
Well, there's definitely a public and private dimension to this dispute, right? What kind of decisions are reserved for private decisions? For instance, if a parent believes that their child really is a male in a female's body and they're willing to pay for the surgery, should they have the ability to do that for their child at age 12 or 13?
Yeah, but remember, that same parent also, we're going to just for purposes of this discussion, we'll say that same parent also believes that child is old enough to drink in their own home.
Sure.
Should that parent have the right, because they're the parent, to let that child have alcohol at age 10 in their own home under the law and not be held accountable for the results of that decision?
In an individualistic culture, there's a very wide scope for private decisions. You do where your conscience leads you, and there is some intervention at a collective level, but it's not heavy.
No. We absolutely have laws on what age somebody should drink.
I'm saying the wider the private scope, the more latitude you have and the more accountability is to the person that's making the decision. There's lots of ways in which we've overruled that now. We have laws and, even healthcare. There are certain decisions that you're not allowed to make. You can't withhold, for instance, there's a religion that doesn't believe in medicine. For instance, they believe in natural healing.
Okay.
And so those people are not allowed to refuse health care for their children.
Okay.
I think for good reason.
But we went through a process, that went all the way through the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is culturally here, we believed in the rule of law.
Yes.
And then we believed that law should apply equally. What I'm saying is that I believe that what the culture where we're moving now is in certain areas, we don't believe that the law of accountability should apply. When I say we, not me, but the people who
You're not talking about me, are you?
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm saying that within our society, those who believe that a 10-year-old, that parents and professionals have the right to transition and mutilate a 10-year-old's body,
right,
and not be held accountable if that 10-year-old, when they're 25, says, "I wish that hadn't happened." They're not accountable.
Right.
That now that 25-year-old has no one to turn to and say, "Why did you do that to me at age 10?" And that's culturally now we now have people who say, "I don't want to be held responsible for that. I can't be held responsible because of this other value." And then the pharmaceutical companies that provide the hormone treatment, from a business model standpoint, there probably isn't anything that's more exciting for a pharmaceutical company than somebody who now has to be on an expensive drug for the rest of their life. From a purely business model standpoint.
Sure, it's profitable, and you can see what their incentives are.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of broader cases like we so sexualize our culture. It's saturated with cosmetics and sexual exhibitionism in our entertainment. people thrusting and things like that. And then we expect kids that are got raging hormones to maybe look the other way. They're not doing that. And so when did they start experimenting? And is that healthy for them? Who's accountable for the results of that and the early pregnancies?
Right. And now you have, for example, in Texas, I think there's some website called Fans Only or Only Fans or something like that.
You apparently don't use it.
I do not use it, and I do not use it.
I don't know what the name of it. I think it's Only Fans.
Yeah,
though.
yeah. Okay.
Is that right? Yeah.
Okay. Well, at any rate, Texas has essentially said that they can only operate in Texas if they have proof that the people who are viewing are old enough. And so they had to shut down in Texas because they couldn't meet that standard.
Yeah, and the penalties were so high.
Penalties were so high, and so the question is, as a society, should 10-year-olds be watching that sexual behavior? Should they be watching?
My understanding is it's pretty standard now. By early teens, they're all seeing porn.
Well, but that's not legal. It's not
legal in Texas.
No, it's not even legal in other places. It's just not enforced.
Okay.
And so in Texas, they've now passed a law that will enforce it and impose penalties. And so this gets back to my fundamental question about our culture, is that if people are doing things that are harmful to children, and should they be held accountable? And historically in our culture, if they did, they were. And now they're not. The Maryland man is now he's now a folk hero for the left, even though
who's the Maryland man?
Alberto Garcia, the Maryland husband, the Maryland man.
Okay,
the husband for the guy from Maryland who was trafficking, human trafficking. He was stopped here in Tennessee, and he's on trial here in Tennessee.
He was stopped in a van with about a car with about 7 or 8 people he was transporting.
None of whom could speak English.
Yeah.
And none of them who had a suitcase, but they all had a toothbrush. And so the policeman who stopped them, they in their report they said this is a classic human trafficking situation.
Right.
But the Biden FBI said let him go.
Yeah.
Okay, but they had all the records, and so now they're prosecuting him in Tennessee.
Trying to deport him.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to deport him. They did deport him, then they had to bring him back. Of course, now they're trying to deport him to Africa, I think.
Uganda
instead of Costa Rica. So, and they claim that he's a gang member.
At MS-13.
And then according to the left, I think one of the senators from Maryland went and visited him in prison in Costa Rica.
In El Salvador.
El Salvador. And so I think their idea is this is an innocent young father who's being tormented for no good reason.
Well, but they know he's not. They know he's not, and this is what's so fascinating about this is his wife accused him to the police on at least one occasion. I think it was 2 or 3 of beating her.
Right.
So that's on record
Yes.
that he has done that, and she actually filed for a restraining order because he was beating her. And so here's a person who they know he hung out with MS-13 gang members. They know that he was moving people who couldn't speak English and had no suitcases. And by the way, there's a record now that shows that he did this at least 50 times. Okay, so he was essentially a human trafficker.
Yeah, they call those mules, don't they?
Well, no, I think
carrying drugs.
I think that mules carry drugs.
Okay,
I don't think
he's not accused of that. Just ferrying people.
Yeah, but
human trafficking.
Yes, and so at any rate, but the left, because he is an illegal immigrant, he is now, they're trying to stop the enforcement of the law on illegal immigration. Now, the law allows you to claim political asylum in the U.S., and it's supposed to be a rare instance. But under the Biden administration, anyone who claimed political asylum was allowed to be let in, and then would be judged. Their case would be judged at some future date. And so he claimed that if you send me back to El Salvador, the gangs down there will kill me. Well, okay, so the Trump administration and the Supreme Court has approved this, is that he still is eligible to be deported, and he's now been ruled to be deported, and if my memory serves me correctly, The Trump administration said, if you'll plead guilty to human trafficking, we'll deport you to Costa Rica. And if you won't plead guilty to human trafficking, we'll deport you to Uganda. Now, his lawyer, this part's kind of funny, and this is kind of an aside, but it is funny. His lawyer said, filed a motion to not have him sent to Uganda because he can't speak the language of Uganda.
What is that language, Crom?
It is English. It is English. The official language in Uganda is English.
Wow.
And that's what's humorous is because in his stop with the police here in Tennessee, he was speaking English with the police officer, but he claims he can't speak English, and therefore Uganda is not even where he should be sent. Well, he immigrated here, so it's just. So the point I'm trying to make is that this guy doesn't have a single leg to stand on, but yet there's an entire political party that is trying to keep him here
and part of the legal establishment.
Yes, and the question is, they essentially this is a cultural question. They don't like this particular law for whatever reason. They don't like this particular law,
right?
And they don't think that it should apply because they don't like it.
Right.
And that's really the argument.
They think it produces an unjust result and therefore ought not be enforced.
Yes. And so if we're either a nation of laws or we're not a nation of laws, we're a nation of opinion.
Yeah, I mean, if you have that many laws and you just enforce some of them, it becomes a political regime. It's not a rule of law. It's a rule of power. Exactly.
And so culturally, I keep wanting to drive this back to this question of culture because you have this situation in Minnesota, and the mayor of Minneapolis, he came out, and the very first thing he said was, "This is a terrible thing, and anyone who uses this terrible tragedy to attack the trans community is a horrible person who has no humanity."
I heard a story this morning on the way in here that talked about this incident and made no reference to these details about the case.
Right. And I've also seen reports where they said, and there were writings on the gun and ammunition
that mentioned Trump.
That mentioned Trump, but not I hate Trump, kill Trump. Yeah. It says kill Trump now.
Yeah, and you'd think from the way they described it that he was a Trump supporter.
Trump supporter. Yeah. And so and this gets into the culture. The people in the media who are what I would describe as misreporting.
Dishonest.
Yeah, are dishonest. That's now part of our culture.
Yeah.
That is now seen by the people who like the point of view that is dishonest. They see that as good. And my question to you, Michael, is: can a society survive for a long period of time? Because this is not something that's been going on for a long time, and it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse in the last say 10 years.
Certainly causes lots of problems. And, there's a great quote, I think it's from Adam Smith, who said, there is a lot of ruin in a nation, which is to say, even an advanced society like England, and post-colonial England has certainly got a lot of ruin in it. The United States, as strong and powerful and advanced as we are, we've got a lot of ruin in it.
Yeah.
And it goes with being free, it goes with human nature.
Does it go with prosperity?
Having ruin?
Yes.
Well, there are people who don't participate in the prosperity. So yes,
but I mean, even
not everybody is prosperous in a prosperous country.
Right.
So there's people that are on drugs and they're homeless and are without a lot of the advantages of an advanced, prosperous society.
Right. But there are a lot of people who are prosperous who are okay with that. And so what I'm saying is, what I'm asking you, because Europe is the European Union has had almost no economic growth in the last 20 years.
Right.
The United States has had a reasonable amount of economic growth, even though we had a very high spike in inflation.
And that has an abstract kind of feel to it, a statistical number. But I've seen a story about this, and basically their average incomes in Britain are about half what they are in the United States, if I recall.
Yeah.
This is real day-to-day living conditions, and they have dwindled.
Yeah, their definition of the middle class and our definition of a middle class person, what middle class people in each country have, and their living standard is actually quite different. And so it's interesting. But in the cultural piece of this is that one of the most important sections in the Constitution as it relates to prosperity is the section in the Constitution that protects property rights and protects intellectual property in particular. And that's what protects patents, which creates investments, which creates innovation, which creates higher levels of productivity, which ultimately lead to higher levels of prosperity. But all of those things still have to exist on a foundation of the rule of law.
And it produces a lot of inequity because the Jeff Bezoses of the world, the Steve Jobses of the world become multi-billionaires, and not everybody else is a multi-billionaire.
Right.
So is that good or bad?
Right.
It's very unequal, inequitable,
and
it makes everybody more prosperous.
And if you ask Mandani, the answer is that's terrible.
The mayoral candidate in New York?
Yes. And he's about to become mayor. And so if somebody lives in a $20 million apartment in New York, according to Mandani, that's unfair and that needs to be fixed. Yeah. Well, that's a cultural question.
Right.
Should it be fixed? And if it is fixed, how should it be fixed?
You know, what occurs to me is that underneath all this, we're sort of debating what does justice mean?
In our culture.
In our culture. Yeah. And so if you understand justice as your rights being respected, that's one way. It's a bit limited, but that's one way of understanding it. But to me, the real rub in it comes this way. Is it just for everybody to have the same thing? Or is it just for people to get what they deserve?
Well,
let's stop here before we go to or.
Well, no, but I want to get to the same point, though.
Okay.
And the way you're discussing it is what people have, but I'm talking about rights, because you mentioned rights.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't believe that you have a right to live in a place that's 10 times more valuable than I do, then that is a more foundational question. Because if I ever get the political power to take away what you have because I don't think it's just or right because it's different than me.
Yeah, it's more than me.
Yeah. And so this gets into rights as opposed to property. Who has the right to determine the amount of property any one individual should have? And that's a cultural question. It's a cultural question. It is fundamentally, culturally, should a person have the right to keep the fruits of their own labor?
Right.
That's a cultural question.
That basically is concluding that people get what they deserve.
Okay.
Okay, because they've earned it and they get to keep it.
Okay.
There's other people that think it's too different. You know, we need to take away what Jeff Bezos has earned because he lives too differently from other people. It's not fair on this planet for people to live that differently.
Yeah. Yeah, and that what I'm saying is that I know that we're on the same page here, but it gets back to what we're talking about, class of cultures.
Yeah. Yeah, and so these principles are really important. We're trying to kind of spin out from a general question about culture and who has what power and who has what rights and who has what responsibilities and accountability and all of that. How do you deal with all that without boiling it down to some essentials like you get what you deserve or you get the same as everybody else?
Yeah, it's kind of like if you play chess. Have you play chess at all?
I have played chess. I have. I don't play it often now.
I used to play chess, and I was okay at it. But there were certain people who could beat me every time.
Right.
Okay. Is that fair?
Sure.
Why? I got beat every time.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we fix that?
Because you're not very smart.
No. Well, that's true too. But okay. Well then.
Well, sure. It's a contest, and if somebody beats you every time, that's
no. Wait. But what I'm saying is this: is that that's the same thing as in that contest. That's the same thing as wealth. It's the same thing as wealth. And so most people, regardless of their political persuasion, if somebody buys a new board game, and none of them have played it, and they decide they're going to play it, the first thing they do is they read the rules, and there is an implicit agreement, or maybe even explicit, that we will follow the rules, knowing that at the end of the game, someone will win.
Yes.
And everyone else will not win.
Right.
But we play. And if we as a culture say, well, that's wrong,
We can't.
We cannot have winners because that means we have losers, and we cannot have losers.
Right.
What does that mean? Where do we go with that? And that's what I see is happening right now. Is I see people who are openly saying wealth is bad, and we must take it away. Well, that's the same thing as saying that person is ahead in the board game. Move them back to the start as they get closer to the finish. And so that nobody,
we're talking about this as a new problem, but I remember when we were doing knowledge products,
that's true. Yeah.
They had a name for those people, and they called them levelers.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible to bring up the lowest rungs, the people that are so uneducated that they can't produce. They're not as productive and effective. Raising those people up is a lot of work.
Well, it's not.
It's sometimes not possible.
Not possible.
But what you can do is knock down the top. So they call them levelers, knocking down the people that have stood out.
Yes. Yeah, the example that I give is if you have 10 people who are all at the starting line of a 100-yard dash, and your goal is to have all of them finish at exactly the same instant, you have to slow 9 down to the slowest one.
And in a classroom, if you want everybody to be at the same level, you've got to slow everyone down to the most common denominator.
Right. So Mike, I've enjoyed. We've had an interesting time, but it all gets back to the values that a society has,
and our agreement on those values.
Yeah, I see a lot of fraying. I'm 77 now. I had a birthday recently, and thank you so much for the giant present that you sent me.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, every year I give you
every
that.
year it gets bigger.
Yes,
every year.
Yes.
And so I look at things. I've seen a lot of angst and then recovery and angst and recovery. And I just wonder, and I'm hopeful, but you see the amount of you see a lot of things like the amount of federal debt is now at an incredibly high number compared to what it was even 20 years ago. And 20 years ago for somebody who's 30 sounds like a long time. 20 years ago is not very far, not very far back.
Right.
And so it is my great hope that we can remain a civil society, that we can debate our differences. We can agree that we will live with the results of our political process, and if we don't like it, that we will go through the legal processes of trying to change the political process, and not trying to impose our will on others by summarily changing our political process, so that the outcome is the one that the most powerful want.
Right.
Thank you, Mike.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Okay.